What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And as always, we have ourselves a lot of volleyball to talk about, as Texas repeating as national champions. How did the Longhorns do it? How did they repeat as national champions and win their fourth NCAA title? Also, how about Wichita State winning the NIVC over UTEP? How did the Shockers zap the competition into submission? Also, we have my NCAA women's volleyball tournament superlatives to give out. And we also have some NCAA women's volleyball transfer news. And to close out the show, I'm going to be reflecting on the entire NCAA women's volleyball show and getting y'all ready for NCAA men's volleyball season. So hand me a volleyball, set the net, because I'm about to serve up some volleyball action here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IESR Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you all for joining me on this Monday afternoon, Monday evening, Monday wherever you are listening from. Either way, you have made your way into episode 225 of Set Point. And without any further delay, let us begin. But first and foremost, Set Point would not be where it's at without IE Sports Radio to provide the platform to go live on Spreaker. Please do follow IE Sports Radio on, formerly known as Twitter, X, Instagram, and on TikTok, and like us on Facebook. Also, we have ourselves a website, www.iesportsradio.com, and it's a daily updated website, which has your sports news, our blog, our Hall of Fame, which voting is now open for those that are curious, our Fans of the Month, our pages dedicated to each podcast, our community farm, and our merchandise shop. Because for the past 9 years and counting, iSports Radio has been bringing you amazing content ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, coaches, and other authorized media personnel to building tailor-made shows dedicated to all major sports cities around the country. All the while, we've been continuing to be by the fans and for the fans, and I can't thank you all enough for all of your support and for making iSports Radio your direct feed for all that sports. Huge shout out to our sponsor, Planet Jerky Premium Brisket Beef Jerky. Planet Jerky is the official jerky of the 2022 California League champion Lake Elsinore Storm, the single-A affiliate of the San Diego Padres. This all-brisket jerky has gluten-free options, contains no MSG, no sodium nitrate, it's low in sugar, and high in protein. This is some of the best jerky you can get your hands on, and all you have to do is visit www.planetjerky.net and place your order. Oh, and also, if you follow them on Instagram, @Planet Jerky, feel free to tell them that you heard about them via IE Sports Radio and one of its shows, being us. So if you do that, you'll be entered into a raffle where you can win 2 bags of jerkies. Also, prices are slashed through the holidays, and if you buy an order's worth of $50 or more, you get shipping for free. Once again, a huge shout to our sponsor, Planet Jerky Premium Brisket Beef Jerky, the jerky that's on a whole other planet. And the way you can follow Set Point on social media is on X, formerly known as Twitter, @set_point.ie, and then on Instagram, @set_point.iesr. And I'm available mainly on X, which is my main platform, @Teran Rodriguez 1. I mean, I have Instagram, but I'm not ultimately active on that. I mean, sometimes I am, but not ultimately a whole lot. But without any further delay, let's begin. As Mikey Two Guns is in the chat room, the host of our Boston show, Our Bleepin' City, he says, "Hey buddy, here for a great show." And he says, "Congrats to Texas for going back-to-back." Let's recap the semifinals first, but thank you for tuning in, Mikey, as we got to recap Pitt and Nebraska. And going into this matchup, this was the battle of two young teams. Nebraska not having one senior on their team, whereas Pitt, they had two on-the-rise stars in Olivia Babcock and Tori Stafford. But early on, Pitt was looking like they were going to challenge Nebraska. I liked the fight that they brought early on. But unfortunately, once Nebraska strung together 2 points in a row, they eventually stacked it on. And eventually they took that first set 25-20. I didn't really think that Nebraska was going to be skipping a beat all that much. The second set, this second set was rather closer than the box score says. Yes, there were only 2 ties and there were 0 lead changes as Nebraska led the entire way. But Pitt showed some fight toward the end, and they actually caught Nebraska a couple times. They actually tied it up a couple times, one other time, not just early on, but it was tied midway through the set. But Nebraska eventually strung together 3 or 4 points in a row. They eventually had set points, I want to say, 3 times. They led 24-20, and then Pitt rattled off 3 straight points to get within 1. But sadly, Pitt missed a serve, and Nebraska went up 2-0 as they took the second set 25-23. Then Nebraska really kicked into high gear as they were just swinging for the fences. They hit 407 in that set, and their side-out percentage was the best in terms of the entire 3 sets. They did not have too much trouble in that set, and even when they did, they just shook it off and just said, "Oh, you got some momentum going? Let me take that away from you." As Nebraska took the third set against Pitt, 25-17 in the match. Nebraska was led by Harper Murray, who had 13 kills, while Allie Batenhorst and Merritt Beeson both had 8 kills. Olivia Babcock had 12 kills, while Tori Stafford had 10 kills. Valerie Vasquez-Gomez added 7 kills. My takeaway for Nebraska is this. They were just on a tear. They had 15 blocks compared to Pitt's 8, and they were just serving very tough for the most part. I know Nebraska got outdug by it too, but that didn't ultimately matter. They held Pitt to 137, which I'm 95% certain is well below their average. And then Nebraska, even though they hit 245, I was just generally impressed by them. And again, for a young team who is starting 4 freshmen and has 0 seniors, this is a team that is going to be probably building a dynasty in the up-and-coming years. I really think Nebraska has the ability to build something really special. And John Cook does a really good job. I definitely admit that he is definitely building up something special for Nebraska. And again, with all those players returning, man, Nebraska is going to be so tough to beat. I mean, you got Lexi Rodriguez coming back. You've got Allie Batenhorst, well, as I said, Harper Murray, Andy Jackson, Merritt Beeson took a massive step from Florida back from when she was at Florida all the way to Nebraska. I'm not trying to say that her time at Florida was wasted, but I'm just saying she looks reinvigorated and revitalized at Nebraska. But that's just something that seems to happen when it comes to the transfer portal. That's the beauty of the transfer portal. If you get a change of scenery, then you basically are all you need is a change of scenery, and then you could be a whole different player. For Pitt, my takeaway is this. There's no shame in losing to them, but again, they just got outblocked, and having 2 freshmen lead the way is kind of not the recipe for success. And the main problem is that they ran the middle somewhat, but not. They only ran it like 6 times. They only had 6 kills in the middle, and Rachel Fairbanks was not 100%. As one of my followers kind of pointed out, she kind of had a back brace on her backside, but she also was battling an ankle injury, and an unhealthy Rachel Fairbanks was not going to help Pitt win this one. But I give Rachel Fairbanks a lot of credit just because she helped the Panthers get this far. And obviously, Pitt was coming off of an emotional 5-set match in a win over Louisville. But sadly, they just ran into a buzzsaw that was Nebraska. And it's a bummer that their season ended, but I kind of figured that the buck would have stopped there just because they would have needed to play perfect volleyball to beat Nebraska. If they had played the same way Arkansas played them in the Elite Eight, then maybe Pitt would have at least forced a 4th set, maybe possibly gone 5, but This is Nebraska we're talking about. You actually have to beat the beast in order to, take them down. You can't just hope that you get a few calls to go your way or anything of that sort, or a few good bounces to go your way. So, unfortunately for Pitt, that was how their season ended, but it was still a great season for them overall. The fact that they even got to the Final Four for the third straight year is very impressive. Soon they're eventually going to get that national championship, or make their first national championship appearance, as they have yet to make the national championship. But it's all good on their end. I really think that Dan Fisher is building something special. And with Tori Stafford and Olivia Babcock coming back, they're only going to get better, faster, and stronger. And Mikey says he has a question about the transfer portal. I know in the past players would have sit out a year if they transfer. Does that rule apply, or do they get to play immediately next season? They get to play immediately next season as long as they clear all the paperwork and whatnot. Unless of course something is like broken, like if you sign with a pro league, then the NCAA denies you, which was the case for one of Wisconsin's players that transferred from Baylor last season. And Mikey says that some of the attendance numbers that the championship matches played in the Final Four were impressive, as well as the viewership numbers, but more on that later. Next up, we have Texas versus Wisconsin, and going into this matchup, I had a feeling that this one, I was hoping at least was going to go 4, if not 5. The first set was kind of a tug of war, as it was tied 12-12. Texas rattles off 3 straight. They go up 15-12. And believe it or not, Texas actually led the entire set, but don't let that stat sheet fool you. It was actually quite tight. And the thing about Texas is that they led most of the set, but it was not without Wisconsin managing to come back from certain deficits. Every time that Wisconsin found themselves down, they always found a way to work their way back and at least either tie the game or tie the set or get close to Texas. The only problem was that Texas had an answer for them. Texas basically said, Wisconsin has an answer for us, let's steal their momentum. Wisconsin has an answer for us, steal their momentum, so on and so forth. It was tied at 21 apiece, and then Texas went on a 3-1 run to basically take that first set 25-22. And I think that was kind of the turning point of the match. If Texas doesn't take that first set, Wisconsin has momentum going into set number 2. And set number 2 actually saw Wisconsin leading the entire way. There were no ties. They jumped out to an early fast start. The only thing was that they actually led 15-7, but there was something in my mind thinking Texas isn't going to roll over that easily unless Jarrett Elliott subs out all of his starters. And they didn't. Texas got within 1, but Wisconsin just kind of kicked it into turbo drive. Notice how I said the word turbo drive and not overdrive, as Wisconsin just barely had enough turbo in the turbo drive to take that second set 25-20. And I give a lot of credit to Texas. They did not wither, and Texas overall played so great in this match. Even in that second set where they lost, I was just generally impressed with them. As you all probably saw in my recap video, I know I didn't fully see it, but I did see the match on my phone. I was at a banquet on Thursday, so I did get to see the Wisconsin-Texas match in its entirety, and I got to look back at it to see some of the big turning points. And the third set, this was where the turning point actually happened, as Texas jumped out to a big lead early on, and they just had not like a big lead, but a good sizable lead, and they just did not look back. They were just serving up a storm, and the big culprit from that, courtesy of that category, is Maddie Skinner, who had 6 service aces overall. Altogether, Texas had 11 aces. They got 2 aces from Emma Halter, Asia O'Neal had a couple aces, Ella Swindle had 1 ace. So Texas just really served tough as they took the third set 25-13. Wisconsin tried to get something going in the fourth set. They were led so early on, but Texas just basically turned on the gas, and they just pulled away from there. And again, they were just serving so tough. Maddie Skinner was just her. And if she wasn't punishing Wisconsin on the service line, she was punishing them offensively with her arm of a cannon. And she also had 9 digs as well. And another player who I didn't make note of in terms of my recap video was Emma Halter. I just gotta say, she's really come into her own at the libero position. And maybe it's because I saw Emma Halter early on when Texas played Long Beach State, but she looked like she was struggling, but I guess she basically wasn't really or she wasn't used to that libero position, because she's filling in for Zoe Fleck, who that's no easy feat to fill in for. Those are some big shoes she's filling in for. But I will say Emma Halter really came into her own in this NCAA tournament, and she really came into her own as the tournament progressed, as she had 19 digs, and Texas took that fourth set 25-16. There was only one lead change overall in the match, and that was in that fourth set. As like I said, Wisconsin jumped out to a brief early lead, and then Texas just really hit the gas. Texas had 4 different players with double-digit kills, as like I said, Maddie Skinner had 18 kills, Asia O'Neal had 11 kills, she had 688, the slide queen as we call her, or as everyone calls her, she slayed, and then Jenna Wenes, she had 10 kills, and then Molly Phillips had 10 kills. Texas as a whole hit 274, while holding Wisconsin to 223, which isn't bad. Wisconsin did dominate the block category, as Wisconsin outblocked Texas 10-6, but Texas also outdug them 56-44, and the serve battle was not even close. Wisconsin missed 11 serves, which is very uncharacteristic by them, and they only had 4 aces, as Sarah Franklin and Anna Smrek both had 13 kills. Tammy Thomas Ailara had 9 kills. My takeaway for Wisconsin is this. Again, here's the thing. If you don't win the serve-pass battle, you're going to struggle the entire way. I feel Wisconsin just did not pass to the best of their ability. And when they played Texas, they were just serving missiles at them. And I got to give credit to Maddie Skinner. She just took... This was her team as she took charge. Last year she was kind of the Robin to Logan Eggleston, who was Batman of the team. But now Maddie Skinner is the Batman, while I would... Okay, maybe that's kind of not the best comparison, but still, Maddie Skinner was just the leader of the team. She was the catalyst. I also got to give a little credit to Krista Barnes. She had 8 digs. Ellis Wendell had 46 assists to go along with 5 digs and 2 blocks and that 1 service ace. Overall, my takeaway for Texas is this. They just served really tough. They were sprawling all over the floor, and they weren't intimidated in having to face some of Wisconsin's taller players like Anna Smrek and Carter Booth. And when I've basically said my praises about Wisconsin. They're such a tall team, and they're so tough to maneuver around offense if you're the opposing offense. But Texas just really had their way against them. And that's all I pretty much have to say in regards to Texas's offense. They just were so effective. They had 57 kills to Wisconsin's 42, which those are amazing numbers against one of the better blocking teams in my opinion. So for me, I was just ultimately impressed by Texas and how they were able to win that one as they advanced to their second straight national championship and their second straight national championship match. And I gotta say, this is why you never doubt the heart of a lion. Or not heart of a lion, heart of a champion. And I will admit, I was one of the few people that didn't have Texas advancing out of the Elite Eight. But I was wrong, and I apologize, Texas fans and Texas volleyball. I was wrong about Texas. I was just generally impressed, and sometimes the regular season just doesn't define a team. I really think that Texas, in my opinion, peaked at the right moment in the NCAA tournament. Everyone was worried about them saying, oh, they dropped a set against Texas A&M. So, as Paul Sunderland said, you got to win 3 sets. He said that on the 5th set, and if you didn't listen, go back to that, which I don't think you can. But still, Texas wound up winning those 3 straight sets against A&M. They wound up sweeping SMU. They were able to survive against Tennessee, and remember, they took down Stanford on the road, and then they also beat Wisconsin, and now they are in the national championship match against Nebraska, the number 1 overall seed. And this was played at Amalie Arena in Tampa Bay, or University of South Florida. As I forgot to mention the attendance for both of those matches regarding both semifinals. So in terms of Pitt, Nebraska, there was no attendance in terms of both. The stat sheet does not dictate on how much was in attendance. Thanks, NCAA. But the attendance for the second match was 19,598. Now, I'm not sure if they didn't track attendance just because there was another match and maybe there weren't a whole lot of people, or they just want to get the entirety of the second match, or maybe it was just an error. But still, 19,588 in a semifinal. Whew, that's quite a bit. All right, now for the national championship match. Texas versus Nebraska, and this was on ABC. You also could watch it on ESPN Plus or ESPNU or anything of that sort, or ESPN3. Regardless, this was on ABC, and this was on a Sunday. This is the first time a National Women's Volleyball Championship match was played on Sunday as opposed to being played on Saturday. So the first set, Texas jumped out to an early 4-0 lead. Nebraska eventually clawed their way back into it, and Texas wound up leading 15-14 at the media timeout. Nebraska actually caught their first lead at 10-0, and I actually kind of predicted that they would get to 10 points first. If y'all know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. And then it was just somewhat of a back and forth battle. Texas had the lead, and then Texas reclaimed the lead, and then they were doing everything in their power to make sure that Nebraska couldn't get anywhere close, because the more Nebraska stays in a set, or the longer Nebraska stays in a set, the longer Nebraska has a chance to snag that lead, as we saw in this first set against Arkansas. So Texas was up 22-20, and then Nebraska scores on a point. Nebraska scores, and it's 22-21. And then Jarrett Elliott, I never really mentioned this early on, Jarrett Elliott was actually arguing with the referees and the officials. And then at 22-21, Jarrett Elliott was shown a red card, and that basically gave the point to another point to Nebraska. So instead of it being 22-21 with Texas leading, it's now tied 22-22. I'm sorry, it was the red card was actually I'm sorry. Texas was up 22-20. Then Jarrett Elliott was shown the red card, and now it's 22-21. And then Nebraska serves up a service ace, and now it's 22-22. My apologies on that. But still, a red card was a part of Nebraska's 3-0 run, and just like that, it was tied up at 22 apiece. And I'm thinking that red card could actually come back to haunt Texas. Because when you keep Nebraska in for a set for so long after you've led, then the pressure starts to build up to you. Like, Nebraska at that point is not pressurized. The only thing that's pressuring them is basically if they get the lead. But for me, Nebraska, I thought at that point that was going to be the turning point of the set, and that was going to basically be the tipping point of the entire match. But Texas wound up scoring the last 3 points as they wound up winning set 1, 25-22. It was just quite impressive first set. I knew we were going to be in for an instant classic. In set 2, Nebraska kind of jumped out to an early lead. They led 10-7, which forced Texas into a timeout. And I was thinking, all right, Nebraska actually has come into the match for good. I think we found the real Nebraska. Wrong. Texas wound up scoring not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 10, but 12 points in a row. And suddenly, they were down 7-10. They're now up 19-10. And that was probably the biggest turning point of set number 2, and maybe the turning point of the match. I mean, that as well as the final 3 points were the turning point. Because if Nebraska wins that first set, Nebraska is up 1-0, and they're feeling really good after snatching that first set, kind of like how they did against Arkansas. But for Nebraska, they just looked out of it in sorts. I know Texas was serving tough. They had a national championship record, 12 service aces, 5 of which came from Asia O'Neal. And eventually Texas wound up taking the second set 25-14. They just were putting on a serving clinic. You say what you want about the 6 ties and 4 lead changes, but that was early on the set. Once that timeout taken by Jarrett Elliott occurred, Texas basically just turned on the heat entirely. They just cranked it up to 11, if not 11.9. And then the third set, Texas jumped out to an early lead, and they just straight up handled Nebraska. The blocking was close, but honestly, Nebraska just wasn't themselves. They were pressured into a bunch of hitting errors. They almost hit 0 for the match. They finished up hitting 13 for the match. And in front of 19,727, a new national championship record in terms of women's volleyball, Texas wound up winning on a service ace from Asia O'Neal. And that's just the best feeling right there, winning on a walk-off service ace in the national championship match. I mean, walk-off block is also good, because basically you just rip the heart out of your opponent. But either way, Texas wound up winning set 3, 25-11. It was just a smackdown right there. And I hate to say that about Nebraska, but it really shows that experience totally matters. And for Texas, experience just was totally on their side. I'm not saying that if Nebraska had one more year of experience, they might have won, but Texas had that national championship pedigree. Emma Halter played in last year's championship. Maddie Skinner played in last year's championship. Asia O'Neal played in last year's championship. Jenna Wenis, even though she didn't really play on last year's championship, she had some NCAA tournament pedigree coming from Minnesota. The only one that wasn't really experienced was Ella Swindle. But even she made her mark, and she really came into her own this tournament. She finished the match, the national championship match, with 5 kills, 21 assists, and 7 digs. Maddie Skinner led the way with 16 kills, and she had 2 aces and 5 digs. And she also had 1 block. Jenna Wenis also chipped in 9 kills. She had 292, and I admit, she was kind of getting a little bit of flack from fans. They're all saying, without Jenna Wenis, we win this easily. Well, Jenna Wenis kind of came up big in this match, and apparently all the commentators were calling her an X Factor, and she kind of rose to the occasion. And I'm glad she silenced the heretics, as she also had 4 blocks, too, to go along with 2 digs in her 9 kills. And then Asia O'Neal, despite her kind of not having the offensive output that she wanted, she made up for it in the serving game, as she had 5 service aces, and she also had 3 blocks. Right. And then for Nebraska, they were led by Harper Murray, who had 7 kills, but that's kind of where the buck stopped, as Nebraska almost had half the kills that Texas had, as they only had 20 kills, and they had 19 hitting errors, so ugh. And then Texas, if you can do math correctly, they had 38 kills. And like I said, Nebraska hit only 13 for .13 for the match, which does not win you national championship matches. And they were pretty much outdone in almost every category, except for maybe blocks, as they were only a half a point behind Texas. But all in all, my takeaway for Nebraska is this. You're starting 4 freshmen, and I don't think one player that has national championship experience in Lexi Rodriguez. But other than that, they just didn't have the experience to keep up with Texas. And I think that's kind of what mattered the most for Nebraska. If they had at least 1, maybe 2 more players with some championship experience, they maybe are still in that match against Texas. But you got to give credit to Texas. They really were building off the momentum that they had, as they really showed up to the semifinals, and they showed up to the final, and they showed up to the Elite Eight, and they dug their way out of that deficit where they almost saw their season come to an end against Tennessee. So for Nebraska, there's no shame in losing, but I will say I really thought they could have at least taken a first set. I mean, the Nebraska-Texas national championships have ended 3-0, 3-0, 3-0, according to Jared Elliott, and he's actually correct on that. In that regard. But I will just say Texas was the better team. And they definitely have the horses to keep up with everybody. As Maddie Skinner, again, she was named the most outstanding player, and for good reason too. She basically was flying from the back row and flying from the left side. So all in all for Texas, my takeaway for them is this. It matters not how you start, it's how you finish. Because if you all remember, they started out 5-3, and they had losses to Long Beach State, which I covered, and then they lost to Texas, and if I recall correctly, they lost to Washington State, and then they also lost to, I want to say they lost to Florida too. But regardless, Texas started off a little slow, and some were saying that they don't deserve to be in the top 10. But they put their heads down, they kept grinding, and even the loss to Kansas State didn't really deter them, because all they just needed to do was get into the tournament, and then anything could happen at that point. And I was just generally impressed with Texas, and their future also looks bright. Emma Halter, like I said, she came into her own as the libero. She had 9 digs to go along with 6 assists, which was pretty solid on her part. She was just serving tough. It didn't show on the stat sheet, but she was just serving tough for Texas in that match against Nebraska. And when you do that, you're basically going to have yourself a very good night on the service line. And like I said, Texas had 12 service aces. They only had 8 service errors, which is a pretty good ratio right there. So for Texas, I was just overall impressed by them. The fact that they had an answer for every team they faced was the thing that really just impressed me. I was just ultimately impressed by them in that regard, because they had the answer for being down 23-20 against Tennessee and dodging 1 match point against them. They had an answer to take away Tennessee's momentum even when Tennessee had scored 4 straight points to basically tie it up from 14-10 to 14-14. They had an answer for Stanford even though Kendall Kipp was not 100%. They had an answer for Stanford even after they played such a long match. They had an answer for Wisconsin and their tall players such as Carter Booth and Anna Smrack, as well as Sarah Franklin, who was named the AVCA Player of the Year. They had an answer for Nebraska, who wanted to be the little red engine that could, but unfortunately, they just fell short. And that's kind of putting it lightly. But honestly, Texas they just had the answer. And you got to give credit to Jarrett Elliott as well. Jarrett Elliott is a mastermind. And Marcus Losgreat, thank you for popping into the chat room. He says, salute. And he says, does Texas win again this year? And he's referring to Texas win the national championship next year. That's a very good question, and I would not put it past them, because if I recall correctly, Maddie Skinner does return, Ella Swindle returns, Emma Halter returns, Bella Bergmark, their middle blocker, returns. I think their only question mark, obviously Asia O'Neal doesn't return, which, well, she's going to be playing pro volleyball for the Pro Volleyball Federation. And I'm not entirely certain about Molly Phillips. But, Marcus, let's actually do a little bit of a deep dive right there. As, well, Bella Bergmark's a senior, but I bet you she has 1 more year due to the COVID year. Maddie Skinner's a junior, so she'll return. Carissa Barnes, well, she transferred from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. She's a redshirt senior, so she doesn't have any more eligibility left. They have Keani Leigh Akana, who is the libero, but I think Emma Halter is totally fine as the libero. Jenna Wenas is a junior. She'll return. Molly Phillips is a senior, so I imagine she's pretty much done unless something happens. So, Devin Kahahaawi, if I mispronounced that, I'm sorry. She returns. She's only a sophomore. It's too early to say, Marcus, but I will say, yes. I could expect to see Texas back at least in the Elite 8. Barring nothing drastic happens to them, Texas, I think, makes it back to the Elite 8. But do they win again next year in terms of the national championship? They're going to have to get past an experienced Nebraska team, which I'm certain is going to be returning most of its players, and they have Merritt Beeson back and Lexi Rodriguez. They also have to contend with Wisconsin. They're always good. Anna Smrek is back. They also have Pitt, which returns Olivia Babcock and Tori Stafford. I think they also return Rachel Fairbanks as well. Stanford might be a bit of a question mark with Katie Baird and Kendall Kipp graduating, but they still have Cammie Minor, and then they'll also have Aaliyah Rubin returning, and then they've got another great recruiting class coming in. And then it's all dependent on the transfer portal as well. Like, the transfer portal is everyone's best friend, because that's pretty much kind of how Texas wound up winning it last year as well, with transfer players like Maddie Skinner, who transferred from Kentucky. I just realized Maddie Skinner has now won 3 national championships. One with Kentucky, which, funnily enough, she actually wound up beating Texas with the Wildcats, and then 2 with Texas, which, goodness me. So there you have it right there. So it's a little too early to tell, but I would put Texas in the echelon of I think they can win it next year. So that's pretty much that for the NCAA Women's Volleyball semifinals and finals right there. Overall, it was just an outstanding tournament, and I envy those that were in attendance. I wish I could have been in attendance for the AVCA convention and the semifinals and the final, but unfortunately, it's just a lot of money. I'm 95% certain it's going to cost a pretty penny with flying to and from, and then you have to book the hotel, then you have to check into said hotel, then you have to buy your ticket to the AVCA convention, then you have to buy your ticket to the NCAA semifinals, and then the NCAA finals, and then I imagine everything else is going to be expensive. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I'm just saying it's going to be costing me quite the pretty penny if I want to go to said NCAA Women's Volleyball National Championship semifinal, the AVCA convention. Next year's NCAA tournament semifinals and finals will be held in Louisville, Kentucky, as it'll be held at the KFC Yum Center, as Louisville, the University of Louisville is going to be hosting it, and that's promising for the Louisville Cardinals because they return a good portion of their team, and I imagine they're going to be contending for the crown as well. And you got other teams that have a bright future, such as Creighton, Tennessee. Even though they have one player in the transfer, a couple players in the transfer portal, they should be back. Kentucky, I can maybe see them returning. I mean, their future looks bright. Florida, if they stay healthy, they'll be good to making at least maybe the Elite Eight. But time is going to tell. And that's going to basically do it for the NCAA tournament. And to reflect on the NCAA women's volleyball season, it was just a fun and eventful season. But the few big things to take away from the NCAA women's volleyball season is that early season results doesn't matter. I mean, yes, it does, but unless it lingers throughout the entire season, you can't really bank on it, i.e. Long Beach State defeating Texas. And I know that's not... And you have to really dive deep into that match, because remember, Texas did not have Asia O'Neal, and that is a big loss for Texas. They need to have her in order to be successful, because if they don't, then Texas is going to be up a creek without a paddle. And another thing is that serving and passing is just so crucial at any level of the volleyball scene. It's crucial in NCAA men's and women's volleyball. It's crucial in NCAA beach volleyball. It's crucial in high school volleyball, junior college, professional. Serving and passing is just the key. Because if you're not serving and passing well, you're going to be at the mercy of the other team. And that was indeed quoted by the Russ Rose. And then another thing is, once you make the NCAA tournament, anything can happen. Anything is possible with the NCAA tournament, and nobody is basically a lock to win anything until said otherwise. I mean, take, for example, Arkansas and Kentucky. Everyone thought that Kentucky was going to beat Arkansas for a third time and probably give Nebraska a run for their money. Nope. Arkansas was able to beat Kentucky for the first time since 2012 and advance to its first ever regional final, aka the Elite Eight, and then they wound up ultimately falling to the number one overall seed Nebraska, but it wasn't without taking a set off them, and I was just generally impressed. And then another big thing to take away from the NCAA women's volleyball season is that conference matches matter, and having a tough schedule early on matters, because you could lose all your conference matches, but if you're playing a tough schedule early on and it's preparing you for conference play, you're basically in good shape. And as long as you're not playing like cupcake teams, you should be in good shape. That's kind of that was kind of the whole perspective of Texas, and the same can be said for Stanford. Nebraska also played a pretty tough schedule as well. Early on, there were some notable matches. So, all in all, that's kind of my whole takeaway from the NCAA women's volleyball season. If y'all can find out some other takeaways from the NCAA women's volleyball season. Oh, one more takeaway is that experience totally matters. If your team has a good amount of veteran leadership, then I really think that your team is going to at least have a fighting chance in the NCAA tournament. Not saying that Nebraska doing it, having such a young team, was their downfall, but hold on. Sorry about that. But anyway, back to the... Excuse me. Alright, sorry about that. Just friendly neighbors wishing me Merry Christmas. Definitely appreciate that. Merry Christmas in advance to everybody. Alright, back to where I was getting at before I got sidetracked. So, experience also matters, just because in the NCAA tournament, if you have that tournament experience and you have that national championship experience, it's going to pay dividends for your team. And if that is the case, then you basically are going to have a lot of success. I know Nebraska had no players in terms of they had Teran Rodriguez, who had national championship experience, but other than her, they didn't have that setter who was in the national championship match or anything of that sort. I know Texas didn't have a national championship setter from last year compared to this year, but honestly, for Texas, they had the experience to basically overwhelm Nebraska. And I feel Nebraska, if they had one or two more players with experience in that national championship match, I really think that Nebraska has a better shot. But I just thought that Texas being there last year and then trying to add on to their legacy and to basically send off some of their seniors like Asia O'Neal and Molly Phillips with a win, I think that would have been definitely crucial right there. So, and that was indeed crucial and pivotal. And also, something that I forgot to mention is that I think Texas kind of took everyone saying, not giving them a good chance, to heart as well, because I think everyone did not expect Texas to get to the national championship. I think everyone thought that they were going to either lose to Stanford or they were going to get upset by Tennessee. And I think everyone was just panicking over Texas A&M taking a set off them. But that's kind of an in-state rivalry, and they eventually rebounded and wound up winning the next 3 sets against Texas A&M. And then all in all, I just thought that Texas had the horses to basically ride the momentum from that adrenaline of a match against Tennessee, and then again they wound up knocking off Stanford on the road. They wound up beating Wisconsin, and they wound up beating Nebraska. And you want to know what's unique about those 3 teams that I just mentioned? Stanford was the number 2 overall seed, Wisconsin was the number 3 overall seed, and then Nebraska was the number 1 overall seed of the tournament. Going into the Final Four, Texas was the only number 1 seed from its region to advance to the national championship, or to the Final Four. So you have to give a lot of credit to Texas. They just were downright impressive, and I really think that we can never, ever, ever underestimate a champion unless said otherwise. Alright, but that's that for all of my takeaways from the entire NCAA women's volleyball season. Let's get on into the final AVCA women's volleyball Division I coaches poll, or the AVCA/Teraflex Division I women's volleyball coaches poll. 25 through 21 consists of Florida State at 25, USC at 24, Baylor at 23, Western Kentucky at 22, and Houston at 21. 20 through 16 consists of Dayton at 20, Florida at 19, BYU at 18, Kansas at 17, and Arizona State at 16. 15 through 11 consists of Creighton at 15, Georgia Tech at 14, Purdue at 13, Penn State at 12, and Washington State at 11. 10 through 6 consists of Kentucky at 10, Tennessee at 9, Arkansas at 8, Oregon at 7, and Louisville at 6. 5 through 1 consists of Stanford at 5, Pitt at 4, Wisconsin at 3, Nebraska at 2, and your number 1 team in the final AVCA/Teraflex Division 1 Women's Volleyball Coaches Poll is Texas. So Texas did what they did. They started off at number 1, and they finished the season at number 1. So I was, again, generally impressed by Texas, and if you honestly picked Texas to win the national championship, give yourself a round of applause, take a bow, and pat yourself on the back, because I highly doubt anyone picked Texas to win it all. And if they did, well, kudos to them. Unless you're a Texas fan. And obviously you are picking Texas to win the national championship. All right, but that is that for the NCAA Women's Volleyball semifinals and final, as well as the coaches poll and the entire tournament. But also something that happened last week was the NIVC, which took place on last Tuesday, as UTEP took on Wichita State, as UTEP was the host team. And the first set, Wichita State really took off the kid gloves and let UTEP have it, as they took that first set 25-14. It was just a smackdown from the Shockers. And then the second set, UTEP did all that it could to stay within reach of Wichita State, but Wichita State, coming out of the American Athletic Conference, they were just a little too strong, as they wound up taking set number 2, 25-22, and then set 3, Wichita State jumped out to an early lead, and they never relinquished it. UTEP did all that it could to try to get close to them, and I give UTEP a lot of credit. They did not want to lose in front of their fans, but Wichita State was able to take that third set 25-22, and they wound up winning the NIVC, which is basically the NIT of the women's volleyball, NCAA women's volleyball scene. As Emerson Wilford led the Shockers with 11 kills, while Sophia Rowling added 8 kills. Natalie Foster, she had 7 kills. Gabby Moss added 12 digs for Wichita State, who hit 292. They also outdug UTEP 37-29. Even though UTEP outblocked them 6-4, Wichita State kind of won the serving battle, as Wichita State, even though they only had 2 aces, they only missed 3 serves, while UTEP missed 10 serves. On their home floor, mind you. UTEP was led by Alianza Darley, who had 9 kills, while Marian Oval and Torrance Lovesey both had 8 kills. UTEP only hit 135 for the match, as they actually hit 324 early in that second set. They hit 324 in the second set. The first set, they hit negative 53, and even though they hit a very solid 324 in that second set, unfortunately, they just could not recover from that close second set. They just could not get that third set, and it would have been great if this match had at least gone 4, but unfortunately, that was not the case. Wichita State has always been a solid team overall, as Wichita State definitely has that it factor. Sadly, they just didn't have it, and they just didn't have it in terms of making the NCAA tournament, and they had to play in the NIVC. But there's no shame in winning the NIVC just because it's postseason volleyball, and you're not giving the trophy back. You're basically keeping it, and you basically get postseason volleyball. And if you have a bunch of seniors, they get one last hurrah, as basically you give them one more chance to compete in front of their fans and to compete in general before they head off to do their thing. So Wichita State is the winner of the NIVC, as they finish the season 26-8. UTEP finishes 25-10, as they also finished 11-5 from the Conference USA. Wichita State finished 15-4 in the American Athletic Conference. So there is that right there for the NIVC. And my takeaway for the NIVC is this. I really wish more teams partake in the NIVC. I would really like to see more teams partake in it. Maybe get like UCLA or LMU or Indiana, maybe Long Beach State, maybe another SEC team or a Power 5 conference team. I mean, I understand how much volleyball is too much volleyball, and you don't want to like fly out and whatnot. But I honestly like seeing teams the next few teams that didn't make the tournament get some postseason volleyball. And I really encourage, and I'm pretty sure the entire NIVC committee and all of my other volleyball buddies out there will encourage the NIVC to be promoted more and to be possibly partaken in more by other teams. Just because I feel lots of teams would get a lot of mileage, and who knows, maybe their fans who are also on like recruiting trips will get to see said teams like UCL, like maybe a UCLA or an Indiana, or a team that should have maybe made the NCAA tournament, but unfortunately fell short. So I hope the NIVC grows and we get a little bit more. Like when I saw the NIVC, I thought it was exciting. Now maybe it was just because I saw Long Beach State play Santa Clara, but I thought that was an exciting match. It went 5 with Santa Clara coming out on top, and that's how I kind of knew who Julia San Giacomo was, and how I knew that Santa Clara was a tall team that had a lot of blocking athletic ability. And I just liked, and I also knew who Erin Lindsay was, and I kind of had to do a little research on who Erin Lindsay was altogether, and I'm like, who is this Erin Lindsay girl? And then I'm like, oh, she had ties to Stanford. I see. So, there you go. You learn a lot from the NIVC as well. And that's pretty much going to do it for the NIVC and my takeaway for the NIVC. We're going to take ourselves a quick little commercial break. When we come back, we've got some notable NCAA women's volleyball transfers to go over. And then we have my NCAA women's volleyball tournament superlatives to give out. And then we'll discuss what's next for Set Point, because NCAA men's volleyball season doesn't start for another couple of weeks, and the NCAA women's volleyball season is over, and Pro Volleyball Federation doesn't start till late January, so we'll have to game plan on that. But regardless, you are listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, sports fans. It's me, your boy Larry B, and I want to walk you through the world of sports. No. Not just the mainstream major TV deal type sports, although those are important too. But let me be your guide through your journey of all sports, from college to the pros, the minors, and everything in between. Each week, we are talking sports galore with true diehards just like you from a hardcore fan's perspective that's sure to quench your thirst around leagues you may know all too well and some you may even discover here. That's right, sports fans. If you love sports of all kinds, enjoy hearing amazing sports stories, and respect all sports because you know how difficult any of them can be to play or compete in, then this is your show. Join me, your boy Larry B, on the defining moment each week here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports, and let the sports come to you.
Hello, ladies and sinners. Hello, sports fans around the world. Hello, IE Sports family. This is Cale Henderson, the host of IE Vegas, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio. If you folks are interested in sports in the Vegas area, if you're wanting to have a blast for 1 hour, every Tuesday night from 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, this is a show built for the Vegas sports fans, where we feature the Las Vegas Raiders, the Las Vegas Golden Knights, the Las Vegas Aces, and the University of Las Vegas, Nevada Rebels. Hopefully, fingers crossed, MLB team coming soon. Either way, if you folks are looking to have a blast for 1 hour each and every week, tune in Tuesday, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you folks are interested in Vegas sports news, go to our Twitter, at SinCities_IESR, and you can speak with me, the host, Cale Henderson, at Cale_Henderson on Twitter. At any time, be happy to reply. Always want to reach out to our fans. Again, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Sports fans, do you like teams that are tough, cities that are tougher, and fan bases that are passionate about their teams? How about teams that are historic and stadiums that are iconic? Then you belong in Chicago, and you need to check out Chi-Town Weekly. Join me, Adam Kernick, every week as we keep up with all things Chicago sports. Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks, Cubs, White Sox. We'll cover them all, plus more. The Windy City is always buzzing, and we'll keep you up on all the big games and major stories. So tune in to Chi-Town Weekly every week right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Back with segment number 2 of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. Normally this is the time that I'm supposed to be going live or preparing to be going live, and this is the time where Adam Karnick is supposed to be signing off on his show, Chi-Town Weekly.
To IE Sports Radio.
Forgot to shut off Auto DJ. That was a fail on my part, but welcome back to the second half of Set Point. My apologies for the little technical hitch. But normally this is the time where Adam Karnick signs off of Chi-Town Weekly, and this is the time where I'm preparing to go live for Set Point. But Adam Karnick is off as has a little bit of a weather delay, or not a weather delay, but a little bit of, it is a weather delay according to him. So be safe if you're in Adam Karnick's area in Chicago, and Adam, here's hoping that you stay in one piece, you and your family stay in one piece. But welcome back to the second half of the show. Definitely check out all of IE Sports Radio's amazing shows. But without any further delay, let us get on into the second half of the show. So we have to go over some NCAA women's volleyball notable transfers. And the big one that kind of caught everyone's eye or caught everyone's ear was Taylor Landfair of Minnesota hitting the transfer portal, as she has hit the transfer portal from Minnesota. And this was actually first reported by Lincoln Arneal, who, if you don't know who Lincoln Arneal is and you're a Nebraska volleyball fan, you are for sure going to follow him. Anyway, so Lincoln Arneal, who covers Nebraska volleyball and Nebraska sports, he is a fantastic follow, and he broke the news early on. And Taylor Landfair hitting the transfer portal is big-time news, as she was, if you all remember, she was the Big Ten Player of the Year couple last season, and she was just dynamite for the Golden Gophers. But now she's in the transfer portal. She is only a junior, if I'm not mistaken, and her future is definitely bright. She has 2 more years, probably an extra year due to COVID and whatnot. So whoever lands Taylor Landfair, they're getting a beast of a player, and get excited whoever lands Taylor Landfair. But unfortunately for Minnesota, losing out on her really stinks. And she was kind of the heartbeat of the team. She was kind of the reason why Minnesota was relevant for the most part, even though some people or some of the volleyball experts were saying that she needs to step up and whatnot. So I think Taylor Landfair, whoever or wherever she goes, is going to make a tremendous impact on said volleyball program. And also, today, we had Ella, if I mispronounce this, I apologize, Ella Roble hitting the transfer portal from Wisconsin. So she didn't play this season, according to Wisconsin's PDF stats, but she is a outside/opposite hitter, and she's a redshirt sophomore from the Badgers. So I don't really know her numbers, but I'm 95% certain she's going to be making a big-time addition and a big-time splash to whoever does land her. And I definitely think that Ella Roble will definitely make an impact for any program. And it's kind of all about a change of scenery, because you can have a slow start to your college sports season, but eventually, if you find that great spot, you can eventually turn it around and basically reinvigorate yourself and revive your career. Well, your college career, at least. And then some other notables. Jordan Williams from Kentucky, middle blocker. She actually hits the transfer portal. So her numbers, according to Kentucky's statistic PDF stats, are 62 kills in 39 sets played, and she also had 39 blocks, which is pretty solid. So whoever needs a middle blocker, Jordan Williams is definitely should make a definite impact for anybody that needs a middle blocker. And now, I don't know if I just talked about her, but Erica Lovett is in the transfer portal. She is a senior, so I imagine she has one more year of eligibility. She originated from Long Beach State. She played at Long Beach State, but then she spent the rest of her playing career at Tennessee, which she made a tremendous impact. Maybe not as big of an impact as Janasia Moore, but she was that big time option. She was like third or second option for the Lady Vols, and she was big in terms of the Lady Vols advancing to the Sweet 16 and almost knocking off Texas. Another notable transfer is Maddie Bolinovic from Penn State. She is a libero, and she was the one that dealt the match-winning service ace against Kansas. Sorry to Kansas fans that have to listen to that. But to Bolinovic, she definitely has a great serve, and whoever is in need of her or in need of a libero, this is the one you got to get. And like I said, if you get this player, you have your serving's going to go up. And for Penn State losing out on her, I don't think it's the end of the world, just because they're obviously going to have a better class, and they really hit the jackpot in terms of the transfer portal last year. I want to say they got like multiple setters and multiple defensive specialists and whatnot. So for Bolinovic, I really hope that she lands on her feet. So we'll see what happens with her. And then I talked about Katrina Jensen hitting the transfer portal from Boston College. Well, her teammate Elena Crabtree has hit the transfer portal as well. So I'm guessing this has something to do with the number of scholarships that a team has to offer, because a lot of people were making a huge deal about all of Ohio State's players transferring, but it wasn't because of ill will or resentment. It was because Ohio State just didn't have enough scholarship offers for that team. So unfortunately, they couldn't take fifth years. And remember, they also have incoming freshmen, and then they have other transfer players coming in. So before everyone freaks out and says, oh my God, this player is leaving because there was turmoil. No, that is not the case. It's because that there's not enough scholarships to be offered at certain colleges for like fifth-year players. And who knows, maybe they want to go to a certain school that has a certain grad school for their major and whatnot. Because volleyball isn't life. You need to have a plan outside of your athletic career. All right, but that's that for some of the notable transfers that have hit the transfer portal. So some transfers that have found a new home that are notable are Meg Brown, who has transferred from Pepperdine to Kansas State. That's kind of a good get for Kansas State, because Meg Brown gets to be reunited with her assistant coach, Steve Astor, who was a former Set Point guest, and Astor's familiar with her game, and then Astor basically can tell the Kansas State coach who she is, what her strengths and weaknesses are, and Meg Brown will be having one more year of college volleyball, and then she'll be off to doing bigger and better things. And I can speak for experience that I've seen Meg Brown and how she played back in her days at Mater Dei, and I got to see her play a few times at Pepperdine when they scrimmaged Long Beach State, and she's definitely an underrated middle blocker. I think she can also play right side as well, so definitely do keep an eye out for Meg Brown this season. And then another player that has found a home via the transfer portal is Kari Geisberger, who transferred from Loyola Marymount, and she is now at the University of Oklahoma. So she'll be playing for the SEC, as you got to remember, Oklahoma and Texas are going from Big 12 country to SEC country. So Kari Geisberger will be playing for the Oklahoma Sooners next year. And then we also have Mokiana Tufono, who's transferred from UCLA over to Ole Miss. And unfortunately for Tufono, I kind of understand her transferring from UCLA just because she wasn't involved in the setter rotation. It's kind of like what happened with Devin Chang, where she eventually finished up her college volleyball career at Duke after she started off at Cal, then went on to UCLA, and now she finished up at Duke. But now for Mokiana Tufono, she will be playing in SEC country as well, as she'll be playing for Ole Miss, which I think is a good little resting spot right there. Well, not resting spot, but a good reset spot right there to basically get your volleyball career together. And she did have a solid volleyball career at UCLA, but unfortunately she was just too far underneath the depth chart of the setter position. Because UCLA had a freshman setter coming in, and then I think they had one other setter that was in the rotation that was not Tufono, so I could see Tufono working her way up to the starting position for the Rebels, or the Lady Rebels. But that's going to do it for all the notable transfers and players that have found a home via the transfer portal. Now let's move on to a segment that I love to do after the NCAA Women's Volleyball Tournament. My tournament superlatives. So, you know how in high school you have yearbooks that have the whole the best dressed, best looking, most athletic, most spirited. That was my senior superlative back when I was in high school. Fun fact. You also have other superlatives as well. Well, I managed to think of some good superlatives from the NCAA Women's Volleyball Tournament. I only could think of 7, but I don't want to bore you, and I don't want to be repetitive. I also did not want to be repetitive into giving the same superlative to a same team. I didn't want to give Texas most outstanding, most scrappy, biggest surprise, biggest everything, yada, yada, yada. So the most outstanding team, going into that segue, is Texas. So obviously this is without any further explanation. Texas, to me, was just absolutely outstanding. It still is hard for me to believe that their season almost came to an end, as they actually faced one match point, and they were also down 23-20 against Tennessee in the round of 16. But Tennessee just could not close the door. Texas was able to rattle off 3 straight, force the 5th set, outlast Tennessee in a thriller of a 5th set, which saw Tennessee come back from a 14-10 deficit, and eventually Texas wound up winning that said 5th set 16-14. And then Texas wound up winning in 4 at Stanford. They also wound up winning in 4 against Wisconsin in the semifinals. And then they wound up sweeping Nebraska. So Texas really had themselves a special year in terms of the postseason. And it just goes to show that when it comes to the regular season and the postseason, no one really cares what you do in the regular season. Especially since Texas is now going to be transitioning into the SEC. This is their last year in the Big 12, and they ended that year 17-1, only losing to Kansas State, and they've won over 70 straight home conference matches dating back to 2014, where their last loss was to Oklahoma of all teams. So, most outstanding team of the NCAA tournament, Texas. Most grittiest, I was basically talking about them when I mentioned Texas, Tennessee. So, Tennessee, if you all remember their matchup against Texas, they lost their libero in set number 2 as she tried to dive for a ball. She landed on her shoulder, and she was in pretty big pain. And even though she served up a service ace, she just could not continue the match. It's kind of like how Kobe Bryant, who tore his Achilles against the Golden State Warriors back in 2013, he made 2 free throws, and then eventually he couldn't continue. But the only difference is I'm hoping that Torres is still all right. But for Tennessee, they almost took down Texas, and the fact that they got back to the Sweet 16 was phenomenal. And the fact that Tennessee even won, not one, but 2 NCAA tournament matches is great if you ask me. They even got to host as well. They even cooled off a Western Kentucky team which had won 20 straight, or which had another 20-win season, which is kind of part of history as well, because Western Kentucky now has the longest streak of 20-win seasons after Florida failed to cross 20 wins after losing to Georgia Tech in 5 sets. But back to Tennessee, they threw everything that they could handle at Texas and more. They gave Texas all that they could handle. Unfortunately, it was just too little too late, and if it were any other team, Tennessee might have won. Okay, maybe not Nebraska or Wisconsin or Stanford, but if it were maybe another team, like maybe a Creighton or a Louisville, maybe Tennessee advances, but sadly, or maybe even a Kentucky, maybe Tennessee can advance, but I just could not see them cooling off Texas, even if that match didn't go 5. I just thought I feel Texas was not themselves in in sets 2 and 3, and they weren't themselves in set 4 early on, and then they really righted the ship when it truly mattered, when their season was on the line. But Tennessee, as I mentioned on X, no matter what happened in that match against Texas, they were the most grittiest team of the NCAA tournament. And I've never seen any grit and determination and feistiness such as the Lady Vols right there. All right, now for my most disappointing. And this is I kind of had to split this up into several different categories. Now, here's the thing. Most disappointing, I have 2 teams that were most disappointing. Florida State and Stanford. Now, for Florida State, this kind of goes without saying. They wound up winning the ACC, or at least tying for the ACC crown with Pitt. And I'm thinking, maybe Florida State has turned the corner, because I wasn't too high on Florida State early on. And then their coach manages to surpass 900 collegiate volleyball wins, which is he's only the 8th coach. Chris Poole is only the 8th coach to surpass 900 college volleyball wins in Division I, mind you. And then eventually Tennessee was able to, like I said, they wound up beating Pitt, and they wound up tying for the ACC crown because, Florida State and Pitt had the same record. And they even got the automatic qualifier because head-to-head tiebreaker. Unfortunately, Florida State wound up losing in the first round to TCU. Now, TCU did beat Florida State early in the season, but I thought Florida State would have turned the corner past that. And losing that first set was what really hurt Florida State. Now, they weren't as disappointing as last year. I understand that this year Florida State didn't have the talent that they had last year, but still, losing in the first round after you win a Power 5 conference is a little disappointing. But TCU is just as good. Melanie Parra was out for blood that game. Okay, not really, but she was on a mission. She was her in that match. But Florida State, I at least expected them to get to the second round. So for them, that's kind of the reason why I picked them as most disappointing. And then Stanford, I hate to give them most disappointing, but I expected a whole lot better in that Elite 8 match against Texas. Now, I get it. They were outdone in most ways. Kendall Kipp was not 100%. But you have the home court advantage. You would think after losing in the Elite 8 last year to San Diego, Stanford would have that same sense of urgency to say, we're not going to let this happen again. We're not going to let the opposing fans and the opposing team win on our home floor. We're going back to that Final Four. But unfortunately, Stanford didn't, and they wound up being the team that allowed Texas to get a ticket to the Final Four, which eventually Texas wound up winning the national championship. So, and I felt that they weren't themselves after the Houston match. Stanford also had to go 5 with Houston. They also had a little trouble with Arizona State, which for Arizona State, I give them a lot of credit just because I don't think anybody predicted them going to the Sweet 16. But still, Stanford just was not themselves, and I kind of have to put them in the most disappointing category. I mean, I wouldn't say they were as disappointing as Florida State. I mean, they got to the Elite 8, but I expected a whole lot better from them. Their blocking was just terrible in that Elite 8 match against Texas. So, There you go. And then I also had to include in most disappointing the Sun Belt Conference. The entire Sun Belt Conference failed to win one match in the NCAA tournament. As a matter of fact, there was only one team that wound up winning a set in the opening round, and that was South Alabama. Coastal Carolina got swept. James Madison got swept, which I thought was a major disappointment. And then Texas State got swept by SMU. But the entire Sun Belt Conference, how do you only win one set with 4 teams in it? It just makes zero sense, dude. It makes me wonder, how did 3 other teams get an at-large into that NCAA tournament, but not someone a la maybe a UCLA or maybe a Drake or a Duke? I'm willing to bet that if Duke doesn't lose to, I think, Boston College, if Duke doesn't lose to Boston College in North Carolina, Duke gets into the NCAA tournament and not either Texas A&M or Texas State. Because at least A&M wound up winning a set off of, as well as UC Santa Barbara. At least those two wound up winning a set. Texas State did not win a set, which, oh man. And the fact that there were 4 teams from the Sun Belt Conference that made the NCAA tournament and only one wound up winning a set, which was kind of the most unlikely one, no offense, South Alabama, it's just overall disappointing. I would think that the Sun Belt Conference as a whole was more disappointing than Stanford and Florida State. Florida State, I get it, they have a young team, and they had their ups and downs, and they faced a very solid TCU team, but still. And then Stanford ran into probably their worst match of the season, outside of maybe the Arizona State match. I just think that the Sun Belt Conference kind of upped the ante in terms of being more disappointing than Florida State and Stanford. I could have probably just given it to James Madison, but having 4 teams in your conference and failing to win a NCAA NCAA tournament match is just pretty disappointing. It just makes you wonder, what did the committee see in Texas State and James Madison and South Alabama, what they didn't see in some of the first 8 teams out? I'm just saying. It's so bad for those 4 teams that Georgia Southern in the NIVC did way better than them, and they were even more exciting in the NIVC, mind you. And they got to the Great 8, if I'm not mistaken. So, big oof, Sun Belt Conference. You kind of got to do better. Because normally, the Sun Belt Conference is just as good as any other non-Power 5 conference. And I mean, I guess, I guess there were some notable matchups that just did not fall the way of certain teams. Like, I did not expect Coastal Carolina to get past Western Kentucky. I also did not expect... Well, I expected James Madison to get past Baylor. That was the big disappointment right there. That, if I had to pick one team out of the Sun Belt Conference who was majorly disappointing, it was James Madison. That team should have gotten out of round 1. Because Baylor, no offense to them, they weren't as good as they have been in years past. And Baylor looked like their dominant selves. But I guess that's kind of the same comparison for Utah State and Minnesota. Minnesota wasn't good as they were in years past, but they trampled Utah State. But let's move on from most disappointing. I've beaten this horse too much. So brightest future, I gave it to 3 teams. Nebraska, Pitt, and Creighton. Now, Nebraska, there's nothing more I need to be said about that. They started 4 freshmen. They have no seniors on their team this year. It's kind of awkward when you don't have a senior night. I would suggest that, or I would think that they replace senior night with fan appreciation night if they have 0 seniors. But I digress. So for Nebraska, their future is bright, barring no players enter the transfer portal. I really think that Nebraska is going to be back on the big stage. I would not be surprised if they made it back to the national championship match. They've made it to the national championships 2 out of the last 3 seasons. Unfortunately, 2021, they wound up losing to Wisconsin in 5. This year, they wound up losing to Texas in straight sets. And then last season, they wound up losing in the round of 16 to Oregon, which is no shame. And then jumping over to Pitt, most of their players return outside of like Valerie Vasquez-Gomez and Chiamaka Nokolo. As, remember, Olivia Babcock was the AVCA Freshman of the Year, the National Freshman of the Year. She is going to be something special for the Panthers, as well as Tori Stafford. And Rachel Fairbanks, if I recall, she returns. And I'm fairly certain there's going to be a bunch of returning players for Pitt. So expect Pitt back on the big stage. And then I threw in Creighton there because they return Nora Sis and Ava Martin and Kiana Schmidt. They definitely have a bright future ahead of themselves as well. And they almost took down Louisville, but unfortunately they just got tripped up in set 5. I really think that the reversed call where the ball was in instead of out was what really swung the momentum for Creighton. And that was actually a challenge from Louisville, as Louisville challenged thinking that the ball was in instead of out, and they actually won the challenge. And it was a tough angle to look at. It's not like FIBA or the international volleyball where it has like camera angles all over the place, where you get a bird's eye view and then it shows that it's either in or out. So there you have it. But Creighton is going to be back. They finished 15th in the AVCA coaches poll. Don't be surprised if they eventually knock their way into the Elite 8. And you got to remember that Creighton was not 100% throughout most of the season. And they still wound up having a fantastic season. They wound up making all the way to the Sweet 16, only to lose in 5 sets to a talented Louisville team. So for Creighton, do not sleep on them. And then the most historic team. Now this one's kind of, when I say most historic, I say a team that made history within pretty much their entire program, or within NCAA, or it can be an NCAA tournament history. I picked Arkansas for this superlative. So the reason why I gave Arkansas most historic is because, well, they have never advanced to the Elite 8 or the quarterfinals or the regional finals. But they did so by beating Kentucky, their SEC rival. And that win over Kentucky was special for a reason. And that was because they beat Kentucky for the first time since 2012. And if you remember, Arkansas lost to Kentucky in 5 the first go-around. And then they lost to Kentucky on their home floor in straight sets. And then Arkansas just played their best volleyball against Kentucky, and they wound up winning in 5 at Nebraska. So for me, Arkansas gets most historic just because they made history in beating Kentucky for the first time in over 10 years, and they made the regional finals for the first time in its team's history. It's going to be tough saying goodbye to those players such as Jill Gillen and Maggie Cartwright and Taylor Head. Those players really made a tremendous impact for Arkansas, and I hope Arkansas does make its way back to the NCAA tournament, let alone the late stages of the tournament like the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8. They had never even been to the Sweet 16 or the regional semifinals in its team's history, and the fact that they got to the regional semifinals, let alone the regional finals, and they took a set off of Nebraska is quite astounding. And it just goes to show that this Arkansas team was super special. And it also shows that the regular season does not define Arkansas. The postseason is what truly defines Arkansas, as they definitely showed up in that postseason. And my biggest surprise team of the NCAA Women's Volleyball Tournament was Arizona State. Now, I'm willing to admit I had Arizona State advancing out of the first round, and they had a tough first-round matchup against Georgia. Everyone was saying expect that match to go 5 or at least 4. I did not expect Arizona State sweeping Georgia. That was darn good. Marta Levinska breathed new life into that team, and also Arizona State getting their new head coach is also what truly mattered. It was to the point where Arizona State got off to a historic start. They didn't suffer their first loss of the season until they faced Stanford, and then they eventually beat Stanford, and they also beat Oregon as well. So for Arizona State, they used that momentum in the regular season and carried it into the NCAA tournament. They swept Georgia, and they also swept BYU at BYU. Remember, Arizona State was in the BYU regional, or the Provo regional, and the Sun Devils wound up sweeping BYU. It didn't even look like BYU was anywhere near comfortable in that match. And it's just so darn impressive that Arizona State had the amazing season that they did. Yes, they wound up losing to Stanford, but they gave Stanford all that they can handle. They took that first set, but unfortunately that was kind of Stanford's wake-up call. So all in all, for the Sun Devils, they were really impressive this season, and honestly, I hope they can make it back to the NCAA tournament and make it back to the Sweet 16, because it was their first trip to the Sweet 16 since 1995. So you have to give it up to the Sun Devils, because I don't think anybody had them advancing that far. And some people didn't even have them getting out of the first round. I was not one of them. I at least had them getting out of round one. But it's so tough to win at BYU, and the fact that they were able to sweep BYU shows that Arizona State just has a whole new perspective into its program. And then the last superlative that I have is the most exciting match. So this is for the entire tournament. It could be from round 1, round 2, regional semifinals, regional finals, national semifinals, and then the national championship. I picked Georgia Tech at Florida as my most exciting match of the tournament. But a close runner-up was Penn State-Kansas. Part of the reason was because both of those matches were basically 5-set matches. But they were also down-to-the-wire matches. Those 5th-set matches were you're on the edge of your seat, you're sweating. And Penn State-Kansas, let me get this out of the way. Penn State-Kansas was a barn burner, as Penn State had to go on the road to face Kansas. And let me just tell you, whoever won obviously was going to face Wisconsin, but I think Penn State really earned that victory at Kansas. It's never easy to play at Kansas University. It's such a loud gymnasium, and I saw Kansas's gymnasium packed when they played Texas, obviously on TV, but still, Penn State was able to win on the road against a raucous crowd in Kansas. And Kansas is actually a very good team as well. The fact that Penn State did not get to host kind of felt like a little bit of a slap in the face for them, just because Penn State had some notable wins. They beat Wisconsin. I know they lost twice to Purdue. I know they lost one time to Michigan State. But I feel Penn State kind of was on the borderline of hosting, at least in the first 2 rounds. But for Penn State, they went on the road and they served up the match-winning service ace from Maddie Bolinovich, and it was just a thrilling way to win. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just the biggest way to win. The biggest way to win, the most heartbreaking way to lose for Kansas, but it was just an overall exciting match. And then Georgia Tech, Florida, how could I not pick this as an exciting match of the NCAA tournament? That went 5, and it looked like Georgia Tech was not going to be able to win on the road. They were down 8-4, but then slowly but surely they clawed their way back. I want to say they dodged 1 match point, and they routed off 3 straight points, and they won the match off of a kill from Bianca Bertolino. Actually, no, they didn't dodge a match point. I think they were down 13-10. They scored 4 straight points. Georgia Tech had match point. And then they scored the last 2 points, courtesy with Bianca Bertolino clinching the match off of a kill. And that match just had everything and then some, as it had amazing rallies, it had blocks at the net, it had challenges. It was just jaw-dropping right there. And you feel for Florida just because you have to remember, if Florida had their players like Alexis Stuckey, Kira Hudson, and Anna Dixon, maybe they're a much better team than they are. But unfortunately, you can't turn off injuries like you can in Madden. So, and you got to remember, this is a Georgia Tech team that graduated Julia Bergman. They had to have that new it factor girl in Bianca Bertolino. And this was the best number 16 overall seed versus number 17 overall seed match that the NCAA Women's Volleyball Tournament can get. And the committee got it right when it came to that. And for Georgia Tech to pull out that win on the road, that too was also a hostile environment. That was just a big win for the Yellow Jackets. And I know everyone's probably going to say, well, they eventually wound up losing to Nebraska. Well, yes, obviously, but let's be honest. The fact that they even made it to the Sweet 16 after graduating Julia Bergman is just quite phenomenal right there. And remember, they had their ups and downs in ACC play. They lost to Miami twice, which Miami wound up advancing out of the first round. I guess I should also make note that biggest surprise could also go to Miami because they were the last 4 team in, and then they wound up winning their first round match against Northern Iowa. But back to Georgia Tech, they managed to overcome the lows of ACC play, and they wound up overcoming Florida in a barn burner of a second round match, and they got to the Sweet 16, which was very impressive. But that is going to do it for all of my superlatives. If you have any other superlatives, just let me know. And I will make one more note of the NCAA Women's Volleyball Tournament. You have to get the 5th set in terms of ESPN+. If you get the 5th set, you will not be disappointed. It's basically like NFL Red Zone, as you get to watch multiple NCAA tournament matches, and then you get the perspective of multiple volleyball personalities like Paul Sunderland, I think Holly McPeak, and Courtney Lyle, and Katie George, and Sam Gore. But definitely get the 5th set. I know it may cost you a bit of money, maybe like $11, but if you're not strapped for cash, it's highly, 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 highly recommendable for volleyball fans. And heck, I'm willing to push for the 5th set to happen in NCAA men's volleyball. Let's have Vinny Lopes and Jonathan... Oh god, I'm blanking on his last name, but MPSF bias. Jonathan Bates, that's his last name. Jonathan Bates and Vinny Lopes of Off the Block host the 5th set in NCAA men's volleyball. And then we can have them... I miss Off the Block on X, by the way. I'm getting distracted, but have them host the 5th set in NCAA men's volleyball, and then have like some guests like Rob Aspero, maybe myself, and some coaches along the way. So there you go. All right, but that is going to do it for the NCAA women's volleyball portion of this show. And before I sign off, I will say, next week, I'm not sure what I'm going to do for next week. There's no volleyball for next week, and there's not going to be volleyball until January 3rd, probably. Where, if I recall correctly, Hawaii and Loyola of Chicago face one another. But we have no volleyball next week, to my knowledge. We don't have volleyball the following week of January 1st and 2nd. So I could, hence the word could, take next week off. Or I could preview the NCAA men's volleyball season, because there are 3 NCAA men's volleyball conference coaches polls that have been just released. And for those that are living under a rock, you have the EIVA, the MIVA, and the MPSF that have released their men's volleyball coaches polls. That just leaves the Big West and the Conference of Carolinas left without their coaches polls for the up-and-coming season. But I think the Big West Conference men's volleyball show is going to be this Thursday, which will be airing at noon. I know Rob Aspero and his partner wound up shooting it at Long Beach State, which is going to be the host for the NCAA men's volleyball tournament for the second round and I think it's for like the quarterfinals and then the semifinals and finals. That's for sure. Not sure about the opening round, but time will tell. But on that note, don't expect a show next Monday just because that's Christmas Day. I'd be a madman going live on Christmas Day. Maybe expect a show on Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. I hope I could do a show next week. It'll all depend. If not, I'll just have to shoot for January 1st, which would be next year. But on that note, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Set Point. I really do appreciate everybody tuning in. If you listen live, I appreciate you. If you listen on the playback, I appreciate you. If you listen at work, I appreciate you. If you listen at any time, any place, anywhere, I appreciate you. Shout out to the chat room on Spreaker, Larry B. He said he was here. Pattyback said she was also here. She said, sorry I'm late, I had to turn in the rental car. No problem at all, Patty. Also, shout out to It's Drewski, the host of our Dallas, Texas show. He said, have a great show, my dude. Also, shout out to Marcus Los Great, and Mikey Two Guns, and Mike Pat. Mikey Two Guns also said Texas had an amazing player on their hands with the daughter of former NBA basketball player Jermaine O'Neal, and she was serving aces. Well, yeah, that was Asia O'Neal. And then he also made note that some of the attendance numbers that the championship matches played in the front of the Final Four were impressive. And yeah, and he also congratulated Texas on the back-to-back. But for everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. I'll see you all on Friday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. Have yourself a great rest of the week. Merry Christmas in advance. If I don't see you next week, have yourself a great New Year as well. Peace!